So let's talk about the development of purchasing. Okay, there are several stages in the development of purchasing. So first, the early years, the idea of making purchasing a department, having a purchasing department, started in the late 1800s. Before this, firms didn't have purchasing departments. So they had to purchase raw materials. It's just that they didn't have somebody specifically dedicated to to do the raw material purchasing. So who made the purchasing decisions? Interestingly enough, the salesperson, the person who sold the finished products, made also the raw material purchasing decisions. Okay, so typically this was the case before there was purchasing departments. Now, why were there not why were there no purchasing departments at this stage? There were no purchasing departments at this stage because purchasing was not that important to companies. And purchasing departments were formed as companies realized how important purchasing can be. And the first purchasing departments were formed in the railroad industry. Okay? So the expansion of railroads in the second half of the 1800s put a lot of pressure on railroad companies in terms of raw material availability and reliability. So it was important for railroads to expand as fast as possible. But they couldn't do this unless they had plentiful supply of raw materials. So they recognized that this was a roadblock, this was holding them back. So they devoted resources to purchasing and they formed the first purchasing departments. Okay? And they recognized the importance of purchasing to corporate performance. And in this era, the first book on purchasing was written, and not surprisingly, the first book on purchasing was written by a railroad person, Marshall Monroe Kirkman, and you can still buy it on Amazon.com after some 100 years. And he was a comptroller, a financial employee of Chicago and Northwestern Railroad. Now, in the 20th century, the uh, the importance of purchasing was growing, and the second book was published in this time period from 1900 to 1939. And when World War One happened, um, there was a raw material shortage. Okay, so there's a relationship between wars and purchasing. Okay, when wars start, raw materials become scarce. First of all, they become very critical. Second of all, not everybody sells to everybody. During peacetime, you can purchase a raw material from many countries, but during wartime, the countries may stop selling each other raw materials because they're going to be used for war. Okay, so during the First World War, a lot of companies and governments recognized how strategic certain raw materials are. So even today, the United States has strategic reserves of petroleum products, for example, among other things. Okay, so the importance of purchasing was further recognized because of the shortages during World War One. Now, World War Two uh, showed people how critical purchasing can be. First of all, An army cannot succeed without proper supplies, without proper purchasing. Okay, so purchasing raw materials was mission critical. The governments recognized this, and the raw materials were short in supply. Okay, because the war effort was so extensive, demand for raw materials was so high that there was a shortage of raw materials. So they had to manage their scarce raw material resources so judiciously. Okay, and so for scarcity they had to manage the uh, uh, raw material supplies, and as a result, more colleges started offering purchasing courses and purchasing degrees during this time period. How do we get the most raw material availability, the most raw material reliability at the lowest possible cost? That was the challenge during World War II. And as a result, the number of purchasing agents increased significantly. Quiet years followed World War II. Why? Because the war ended and the shortage subsided, the availability of raw materials increased. And at this point in time, there was plenty of raw materials. Not too many challenges in sourcing raw materials. So at this point, companies were saying, okay, we need raw materials. It's a cost center. We have to have them. We cannot do business with cost centers. And the purchasing jobs were seen as dead end jobs because they thought purchasing is just a cost. It cannot help us gain competitive advantage. Okay? So these were the quiet years. But then Vietnam War happened. Again, a war helped purchasing gain prominence again. Okay, so as there was in addition to Vietnam War, there were a number of oil crises, oil shortages. Okay, so as a result, uh, Western economies and in general the world economy was greatly impacted by these shortages, oil shortages and other raw material shortages. So it became very important for companies to manage their scarce raw material resources well. Okay, so these ideas were brought together, consolidated in the concept of materials management. Okay, so what is materials management? Materials management is an umbrella term for inventory management, inventory control, for purchasing, receiving, inbound transportation, and disposal of materials. The companies realized, okay, raw materials are scarce, difficult to get, they're expensive. How do we extract the most value out of these materials? Obviously, we need better purchasing, better inventory control, better receiving, etc. Okay? So, at this point, because uh, of the scarcity, there was a lot of competition for raw materials. Okay, so companies would try to um, pressure each other, and at this point, the most widely adapted purchasing strategy was a transactional one, a short-term one, an arm's length relationship where uh, buyers pressured suppliers and they set up supplier against supplier to reduce costs. So this was the general picture in the from mid 60s to mid 70s. Starting from the latter part of the 70s, we have seen an increasing globalization trend. Okay, so what does that mean for purchasing? For purchasing, it means global suppliers new raw materials. It also means global customers. Okay, so the coordination of product movements became much more challenging. The distances increased. There were a lot of import-export transactions, a lot of customs, um, documentation and processing, different languages, cultures. So purchasing became much more complicated in the globalization era. And during this time, companies realized how they can use purchasing to gain competitive advantage. So purchasing was recognized as an important driver of competitive advantage in this era. And this became more pronounced when companies adopted just-in-time manufacturing. Okay, the idea here is you want to minimize inventories. How do you minimize inventories? You minimize inventories when you receive them just in time for production. Instead of purchasing and storing inventories ahead of time, companies wanted to receive inventories just in time so that as soon as they receive the products, the raw materials, they can start production. Similarly, purchasing uh, took on some strategic uh, uh, dimensions. Okay, people started looking at purchasing from a more strategic angle. What does that mean? That means they started, buyers started forming long-term partnerships with their suppliers. Okay, so companies realized the benefits of establishing long-term business relationships. We're going to talk much more about this later in this course. And they started the strategic alliances and partnerships in this era. Now, we're in 2015, okay, and today globalization is a given. In fact, these days it's very hard to find a domestic business. Pretty much all business is international business, and purchasing is greatly affected by that. And today, the purchasing landscape is greatly affected by globalization, super buyers, shareholder expectations, and the rise of technology. So what does globalization mean for purchasing? For purchasing, first of all, a lot of companies use low-cost countries as manufacturing bases. Okay, so a lot of manufacturing has moved to farther away places. So what that means is that this makes logistics and transportation so much more critical. And this increases the disruption risk because there's greater potential of delays in the supply chain. Now, in addition to low-cost countries being more the supply bases, they are also now becoming the customer bases. Okay, so companies are seeking additional customers, not so much in the developed world, but in the developing world. Okay, so now firms are buying more from low-cost countries, and they're also selling more to low-cost countries. So this has important implications for purchasing. Now, um, super buyers. Okay, who's a super buyer? Okay, super super buyer is not an action hero. Okay, super buyer is a company that purchases a large amount of product. Okay, so big box buyers force annual price reductions. A great example of a super buyer is Walmart. And what Walmart demands from its suppliers is very high quality and very low prices. So why do suppliers agree to Walmart's demands? Because Walmart provides a lot of revenue for these suppliers. And typically, Walmart is the largest customer for these suppliers. And if you consider yourself a supplier, for example, think about your biggest customer wants something from you. Like, what do? Do you want to lose your biggest customer? Probably not. So you need to figure out a way to satisfy your biggest customers. Okay. What these big box buyers also want is mass customization. What is mass customization? Uh, it's a combination of mass production and customized production. Mass production has low costs, but you cannot customize the products. Now, customization, for example, if you get a tailored suit, okay, that will fit you perfectly, that's customized for you, but then the price will go up. Now, the big box buyers want both. They want customized products, but they want them also at low cost. This is called mass customization. Okay, and big box buyers, super buyers, pressure their suppliers for higher service, more speed, greater reliability, and support. Shareholder expectations. Now, the companies, especially the public companies, publicly traded companies, are very concerned about share prices, and as a result, they want to keep their uh, uh, publicly traded firms are very concerned about their share prices. They want to keep their share prices high. So what they do is they release earnings estimates and they try to meet them. Okay, so what this means is that they are focused on the short term, maybe more than they should. So as a result, companies are trying to scramble to meet their short term forecasts at every possible cost, even at the expense of long term performance. And finally, the rise of technology. Uh, with today's technology, now a purchasing manager can contact a huge number of potential suppliers. Similarly, uh, a purchasing manager can find information about many suppliers online. And when a purchasing manager signs an agreement, a lot of information is exchanged over the internet, and the terms, the conditions, purchasing orders can all be electronically transmitted. And so purchasing is heavily influenced by information technology innovations in our time. Now, the as purchasing gains more prominence in corporations, there are four organizational factors that affect its prominence. The first one is the light bulb effect, and then we're going to talk about internal reorganization, new resource, and technology factors. Now, the light bulb effect is about increasing profits. So how do you increase your profits? Well, you can increase revenues, you can decrease costs. Let's say you increase revenue by $1 and you decrease cost by $1. How will the profit change? Let's say your profit margin is 10%. So the revenue goes up by $1 and the profit increases by 10 cents. What happens to profits when you decrease costs by $1? Well, $1 cost reduction equals $1 increase in profits. So the cost reductions are reflected to a much greater extent in profits than revenue increases. This is the light bulb effect. And this can give you a lot of leverage in the company as a purchasing manager. Earlier in the presentation, I was saying revenues are more important than cost. That is still true, but you can also leverage your impact on costs using the light bulb effect. So just because purchasing is more aligned with costs is not a losing proposition. You can leverage both aspects, the revenue aspect as well as the cost aspect. So internal reorganization. Okay. As I said, purchasing is related to every department in an organization. And as a purchasing manager, you will be very well connected. And that will work in your favor when it comes time to promotion. Okay? Very few people in an organization are as well known as a purchasing manager because the purchasing manager interacts with manufacturing, engineering, logistics, the CEO, etc. So the idea is you collaborate with all the different departments, and in fact you organize your activities across the entire firm. Now, today, as we said, there's a strategic, longer-term focus on purchasing. Firms consider their suppliers as assets to be leveraged. So what this means is that suppliers are treated as business partners. Okay, so as a result, purchasing establishes the link between a firm and its suppliers, and purchasing lays the groundwork for leveraging suppliers to gain strategic advantage. And finally, as we talked about, technology is giving purchasing managers great opportunities to improve corporate performance. Now, how does purchasing relate to other departments? Okay, so there are some departments that are more internally focused, and there are other departments that are very externally focused. Probably the most externally focused department is purchasing, because purchasing relates to everything that's going on in a company. Let's talk about purchasing and marketing. Okay, what does purchasing have to do with marketing? Let's look at the 4 P's of marketing. So product, price, promotion, and place. Purchasing is related to every single P of marketing. Purchasing is obviously related to product design, okay? Because when companies design new products, they must think about what kind of raw materials will be needed, what kind of raw materials could be used, what kind of raw materials might be available, okay? Another issue is when it is pricing. The second P, pricing. Obviously, purchasing is a main factor in pricing. again, marketing and purchasing have to work together to determine the best price. Promotion, okay? Uh, Promotion means advertising, and a lot of companies advertise their selection of raw materials. They say, oh, our raw materials are sustainable, they're fair trade, they're less toxic, they're healthier. Obviously, marketing has to showcase the good purchasing decisions a company makes. Okay? Similarly, place decisions, distribution, physical distribution, and these have to be purchased. Okay? So purchasing is also involved here. Um, Purchasing and engineering. So we said purchasing has relationships with all departments in a company, and some are very natural, very good, very easy relationships, but some relationships can be tricky. For example, between purchasing and engineering. So when an engineer designs a product, he or she wants to do the best thing possible. So typically, an engineering design will strive for the ideal product design. But uh, when it comes to purchasing, the purchasing manager may feel like, well, we can economize on this design, maybe we can use substitute raw materials, etc. So then um, uh, there starts a tension. Okay, so should we produce the ideal product or should we produce something more economical? Okay, so what needs to happen is a cross-functional team, a team from uh, many departments, has to make the final decision. And so the new product ideas is also very important because we said that a lot of new innovative product ideas come from the supplier base, and these ideas have to be transmitted to engineering through purchasing. So as purchasing agents interact with suppliers, their suppliers, etc., they will be acquainted with the new product ideas, new material ideas, new technology ideas, and these have to be brought to the attention of engineering so that the firm can take advantage of these opportunities. Okay, purchasing and manufacturing. This is a very fundamental relationship uh, uh, in a firm. So typically people think, okay, uh, production says what production determines what needs to be bought when and in what quantity. That is true. But uh, purchasing also provides production department, manufacturing department with possible alternatives. So it's more of a collaboration uh, than the production department dictating. And so production department translates sales forecasts into raw material requirements, which the purchasing department tries to meet. And another important function here is to keep sufficient safety stock so that the production doesn't stop. To avoid shortages, uh, um, um, low quality and late deliveries, the purchasing must make sure that there's adequate raw materials in good quantity, in enough quantity, and in good quality. Okay, what is the relationship between purchasing and finance? This is one of those very obvious relationships. So finance and accounting manages cash flows. Okay. So, and a major driver of costs, a major cost component comes from purchasing. So, as a result, purchasing and finance have to work together to decide how much will be spent on raw materials, what kind of raw materials, the timing of purchases, payments, etc. So, a budget must be established uh, by finance and purchasing working together. Okay. Again, purchasing and logistics are closely related. Why? Because logistics provides the inbound transportation of purchased raw materials. Okay, and that becomes a big cost item for the company as well. But logistics has also outbound shipments of finished goods to customers. So what usually happens is that firms try to combine inbound and outbound shipments to take advantage of cost savings. Okay. Similarly, logistics manages storage and warehousing of inventories. So these become inputs to purchasing decisions. At this point, you might be wondering what does legal have to do with purchasing? A lot. First of all, a purchasing transaction is a legal transaction. Okay, so you need to know the rules and regulations about about the contracts. Okay, so when firms purchase a product or raw materials, they want to be able to protect their rights. What do I mean by that? So firms purchase raw materials, they make the payment, but if something goes wrong with the raw material, if the delivery is late, if the raw material is of poor quality, etc., they want to be able to protect their rights in a court of law. They want to be able to go to a court of law and ask for damages, ask for compensation, etc. So, so the legal department helps purchasing in designing these types of contracts. Okay, when purchasing buy materials, they have the supplier sign a contract, and these contracts have to specify these protection phrases. Okay, so the legal department helps purchasing in negotiating the contracts. Depending on the conditions of the contract, the price may go up or down. Okay, so the legal part of the contract is not separate from the price of the purchase transaction. Okay, enforcing contracts. Okay, so there may be a time when a supplier may be reluctant to fulfill their contractual obligations. So what do? The legal department uh, tells the contractor, or I'm sorry, the supplier, that please fulfill your obligation, or else we'll take you to court. And sometimes this may be inevitable, and uh, it's also important to protect intellectual property rights, patents, copyrights. So these things should also be mentioned in a contract. And other types of compliance, for example, environmental compliance, it could be labor laws, it could be other types of uh, laws and regulations. And the legal department will keep an eye on these legal requirements when purchasing buys raw materials. Okay, this is also one of the most important relationships: purchasing and quality. Okay, so raw material specifications are typically produced by quality department. So these are the technical characteristics of the raw materials to be bought. And when a company buys raw materials, the supplier ships the products, the company doesn't immediately accept and receive these products. First, the products have to be inspected, and then once the company is sure that these uh, products that have been delivered meet the specifications, only then will the company receive the product and make a payment. Okay? So, inspection and accepting of raw materials. This inspection is also conducted by the quality department. And supplier selection. Again, a company may have multiple potential suppliers, but which supplier will provide you the best quality? Okay, the quality department will make that determination. And once a company starts to work with a supplier, the quality may not be constant. Okay, so that's when the quality department should intervene and help supplier develop better quality. Okay, and quality department is also a good resource to test new and alternative, innovative raw materials. Okay, let's talk about purchasing careers. First of all, what are some of the common job titles in purchasing? Purchasing manager, buyer, purchasing agent. Okay, so these are some of the most common job titles. And which industry employs the most purchasing professionals? As you can see, most purchasing professionals work in manufacturing industry. Okay, and then wholesale, and then government and retail is last. To become a purchasing professional, you may need a certification, and there are a different number of certifications for different purposes, and then you can also get training for these certifications. So, how much do you make as a purchasing professional? So, purchasing managers make a good deal of money. This is the median earnings of a purchasing professional in, this is 2012. Okay, so this is from 2012. Okay, so purchasing professionals, 2012. Purchasing agents, not bad. Purchasing buyers, retail. Okay. Another thing is, some purchasing agents have an extremely fun life. What do I mean by that? For example, I had a friend who was purchasing for Gap, the clothing company. So, since Gap sources from the entire world, he would basically travel the world for work. Okay, and Gap had suppliers all over the world. He will one day he would be in India, the next day he would be in, I don't know, Mexico. Sometimes he would be in Japan. So he would just travel the world for work, and he would source materials for Gap. So purchasing can be an extremely fun job if you find the right position. Okay. So how about the future of purchasing? Okay. So we looked at 2002 numbers. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics expects more demand for purchasing professionals. So in 2022, they expect a 4% change from 10 years ago in terms of purchasing managers. Okay, this is overall total purchasing. Okay, in terms of managers, there's a 2% increase. Purchasing agents 6%, and wholesale retail buyers 7%. And retail, this is purchasing agents except wholesale retail, farm, etc., 3%. So this is a growing field. It pays well. It can be fun if you find the right company and the right position. And this is a promising career if you're interested. So how do you network? How do you get to know people? How do you get to hear about job opportunities, etc.? For those, you need to become a member of a professional organization. So, what are some of the professional organizations in purchasing? The biggest organization is Institute for Supply Management. Okay, this one, Institute for Supply Management. If you go to their website, they have an incredible website. Okay, there's also American Purchasing Society, the Institute for Public Procurement for Government Purchasing, Universal Public Purchase Procurement Certification, National Association of State Procurement Officials, National Association of Purchasing Management. These are national ones. And there are dozens and dozens of local purchasing organizations. In every state, there's at least one purchasing organizations. Okay, so overall, there are dozens and dozens of purchasing organizations. So there are a lot of opportunities for networking. There are a lot of opportunities for finding jobs. There are a lot of opportunities for professional growth and continuing education. Now, this concludes this presentation for week 1. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you for watching.